by also welcoming Maurice Minor, if you could take the stand, who will be joined later by Janine Nordia Filion, the General Counsel, Africa TransUnion, Africa, and Jackie Kitiwa, Digital Economy Lead, FSD Uganda, in the session that will be moderated by Chief Program Officer, FSD Kenya, James Kashengaki. Karibu, Maurice.
I want to take a couple of minutes and invite the customer into the room through sharing some of the insights that came out of a study that we did towards the end of last year. It's a consumer pulse study that I thought is quite relevant to the discussions that we are going to be having over the next couple of days. So it will not take long, it will just be a couple of minutes to just listen to the voice of the consumer and to see whether we are aligned with the sentiments of the consumer.
This is Africa, the continent of opportunity.
Would you come back on the volume?
The place where tomorrow begins. What can we do? What must we do to ensure the tide lifts all and opens the doors of inclusion for millions? Here on this continent, we managed to begin. What if we can harness the powerful combination of technology and human touch to build a better tomorrow together? The real question is not if, the question is when. And the answer, more so than ever, is now. Africa is rich in resources, not just mineral wealth, but the wealth of innovation and endeavor. At TransUnion, we believe in using the power of information for good by combining the latest digital technologies with streams of constantly updated data. We make trust possible in modern commerce. We help organizations better understand consumers by providing an accurate and robust picture of each person, stewarded with care, and by ensuring each consumer is reliably represented in the marketplace. We can shift the landscape of financial inclusion. We can sow the seeds of a new economic revolution. We can open the doors of opportunity, of promise, of enterprise. Through the power of information and the power of trust, we can transform the future of this continent for good.
So this study, like I had indicated, was conducted towards the end of last year. It looked at the perception of consumers from a market inclusion perspective. And I think what I want to highlight is some of the key findings that are relevant to the discussion we have. What you'll appreciate is 98% of the consumers in the sample believed that having credit or lending products is essential to achieving financial goals. And this is very relevant for us, because it's telling us in the market like Kenya that our population is extremely clear on the benefits that they derive from getting access to credit. However, the second finding was even more interesting, the fact that they do appreciate that. However, only 44%, less than half of those who believe in that, are currently feeling. Another very strong indicator, particularly to the lenders in the room and the ecosystem, that the market is keen on taking action vis-a-vis credit access. And those who intended to apply cited the top 3 products. I'm sure quite a bit of you would identify with that, in terms of personal loans, credit card, and home loans, specific to Kenya. Now, moving on, another important insight that should give us something to think about is the abandonment rate for new credit or refinancing. So consumers taking action to apply for a facility, but not completing the journey. And we'll see some of the reasons that lead to that. So for Kenya, close to 70% of consumers abandoned that journey before completion. Of course, it's higher than what you see in Botswana, even higher than what you see in South Africa. We try to check with the consumers what are the key reasons why they don't finish the journey. And if I can call out a few of them, of course, cost, as you would expect. There is focus on affordability from a credit perspective. But one of the other ones that is highlighted for Kenya is alternatives. That tells us that there is alternative in terms of credit that exists, whether it is formal, whether it is informal, then alternative exists, and about 31% of the consumers indicated they did not finish the journey because of alternative credit. Another exciting one for Kenya is it takes too long to get a decision. This is about the friction. In your environment, what is the consumer journey and how are we enabling it so that we support them in breaking the barriers that exist ahead of them. Now, in summary, the findings shows us that consumers are clear and they see the value of credit in terms of changing their lives and driving their own personal economic progress, and that also happens for the country. Now, it also shows us that a lot of consumers are keen to take that step and apply for credit. But the challenge we are sitting with is that quite a number of them don't finish the journey. And hence the need for us to go through the whole ecosystem and appreciate where can we create a difference and stimulate access to credit. Because consumers are clearly telling us, guys, we understand credit changes my life. However, I'm not sure whether I can access it. And even when I try to access it, something happens along the way that ensures that I don't finish the journey. And of course, like I had indicated, personal home loans are some of the key products that consumers highlighted would be of interest to them. Now, the second thing which is important is about credit monitoring, because consumer literacy is key, and I'm sure over the next couple of days we'll appreciate the value of literacy, awareness, education in driving overall financial inclusion. And we ask consumers, is credit monitoring important to you? And majority of them, over 80% of them, say it is very good, it is extremely, which is a good thing, because that tells you they are aware that checking and monitoring their credit is important. However, it gets interesting on the next slide. When you think about the call to action, the 80% who indicated that monitoring my credit is important, only less than 15% normally check their credit on a monthly basis. And probably a very interesting factor that we need to all unravel and understand why that is the case. And I think studies that have been done have shown this is particularly the case in most developing markets where discussions about money are not commonplace. It's not something that you want to have a discussion whether at home or with your friends. You don't feel very comfortable to discuss about money or about credit, and probably because of the experience that people have seen with credit over the long period of time, which quite a bit of it is not positive. So this tells us that we have consumers who may have taken credit, but they clearly don't put a very proactive check on how the same is performing from their end, and just gives us the opportunity that we need to be dealing with in driving this journey. Of course, the subject of alternative data, I thought it's important, and there was overwhelming, particularly in Kenya, there was overwhelming affirmation by consumers that alternative data use adds value to their credit reporting, and 65% of the respondents indicated that they would approve the use of alternative data to give them much more visibility. Of course, Kenya being much higher than the other two markets, and that could be associated with the emerging threats that we see in Kenya vis-a-vis the other markets in the region. Now, having done that, maybe quickly to get into another slide that just demonstrates what we are sitting with in terms of credit access. And I know the previous presenter indicated about the population and how our population sits vis-a-vis credit visible and credit invisible. Now, if you think about the adult population there, we have a segment that is completely credit unserved. They are not even visible from a credit data footprint, whether formal or informal. But what is interesting is the other portion that is bigger for Kenya, because whether you're looking at it from the data that our friends in FSD would be sharing, we have probably over 83% of the population that is financially included. If I look at this from the data that we sit with as a credit bureau, we have close to 26 million customer records. Now, of course, that is vis-a-vis the population of about 30 million in Kenya. So still, the penetration is probably around 80%. But what is critical is the credit visible portion of it has new to credit, but credit underserved and credit served. So if you think about the credit underserved, this is one portion where many of us, and particularly lenders, don't touch too much because the risk could be extremely high. Now, if you double click on that, so adult population, credit unserved, new to credit, credit underserved, credit served, but more importantly, just explaining where credit underserved consumers would be like 2 years history, so they are in credit cycle, but of course their depth and usage is extremely low. Now, what are the insights that comes out of it? Of course, understanding their profile is super critical, because you understand their profile, you position yourself, and you are able to serve them. Now, looking at solutions and the drivers of migrating them from underserved to served is also a critical agenda that all of us need to be thinking about, and to see where we can come in, particularly from a credit bureau lender perspective, by offering proactive analytics that start to eliminating the risk of engaging this kind of population. And lastly, in terms of performance, some of the research that has been done globally and even by TransUnion indicates that migrating and investing in credit underserved actually gives you a lot of results in terms of what they offer to you after that migration. So I just thought it's important to share those two aspects before we get into the panel session, and for us to appreciate what is the consumer telling us, because at the end of the day, it's what that person and the population that expects to benefit from credit access that should be driving the conversation that we have here today. That covers it.
Yeah, thank you. Like I indicated, I'm Morris Maina, the CEO for TransUnion Kenya. Just a bit of background. I have background in telecommunications for a couple of years, worked in Safaricom. I've also had a background in IT with Microsoft, and great to be here. I feel, and I've been a witness to quite a bit of transformative stuff happening from a consumer perspective, and I'm glad to be here and be part of our journey in creating and stimulating financial access for our population in Kenya and beyond. Thank you.
My name is Janita Defolian. As indicated, I'm the General Counsel for TransUnion Africa. With my team, we look after the 9 businesses across 8 different African countries. And I think one of the things that makes me most excited about conferences like these is this opportunity for collaboration, and it really makes me feel very insignificant when I sit here and I listen to all of the thoughts and the ideas being shared by so many leaders in the industry. So just as a little bit of background to myself, I come with a legal background, but a very strong passion for business. And I've grown up in the credit industry, having worked on all the different sectors of the industry. On the credit provider side, in both the retail space and the telco space. I've worked in the banking environment. I've worked a little bit with policymakers in the regulatory space, and now my most recent role on the credit bureau side. So I hope to bring a little bit of perspective from all those sectors to the conversation today.
Thanks, Janine. My name is Jackie Chitibwa, and I'm the Digital Economy Lead at FSD Uganda. FSD Uganda is independent. We are part of the network that FSD Kenya sits as well, but we are an independent, not-for-profit organization that is mandated to promote financial inclusion and inclusive financial market development. We provide policy and private sector recommendations through evidence, research, and testing of solutions in the market. We also do technical capacity, especially for regulators, ministries, and industry associations. And then we provide, we have a very small portfolio where we provide catalytic grants to innovators in the market for financial solutions that we think have ability to scale and have ability to provide affordable and good quality products for mostly the unserved aspects of the market. As a background, I've been a central banker. I was a central banker for so many years before I started capacity building and technical assistance. I work for a capacity building organization that is based in Zimbabwe and that provided support to central banks and ministries of finance in 14 countries before returning home to join FSD Uganda.
So getting directly into it, Janine, do you feel from your experience that credit bureaus have contributed to increase financial inclusion in Africa? And can you mention some exceptions to this?
Because I think to the point that Jared made earlier, when we talk about financial inclusion, even though I think we've made great strides to driving that, and as an organisation, that's something that's very central to everything that we do. We are very much in our infancy, and I think there's so much more work to be done. Very evident from some of the stats that Liz presented, some of the consumer sentiments that Morris presented. But I think if you just look at the role of credit bureaus and maybe just a little bit of context of what that evolution looks like, is that we have really migrated from a space that was primarily driven around negative data. We sort of grew into this space of positive data, and now there's this big drive to looking at alternative data. But that means that each player in the ecosystem needs to evolve in that journey to make sure that we stay relevant to the consumer and to the communities that we serve. And something that's particularly front of mind for us as a global organization that sort of has a footprint across Africa and has the ability to compare ourselves to other emerging regions is that no community and no economic ecosystem is the same. So even though there's a lot of similarities between those different ecosystems, the one thing that that needs to remain very relevant to the market is how you actually interpret that data to drive that inclusion for the consumer. As a credit bureau, I always say to people, the easiest explanation is to say that we are the filing cabinet, and that we like to see ourselves as the aggregators of this data, not to keep industry or consumers or people beholden to us, but really to drive value to the consumer, to the customer. And we talk a lot about credit and lending today, but the role of the Bureau is much broader than just credit decisions. As we start bringing other alternative data sets into the ecosystem, we're also giving access to providers of goods and services to be able to have a more holistic view of the consumer. In order for us to see the consumer better, we need to see more of the consumer. Morris alluded to that the underbanked, the underserved. And without that data and a party that sits as an aggregator that has the ability to drive quality data, to apply consistent validations to that data, to make sure, especially in markets where there are multiple credit reference agencies, to make sure that the consumer has the same experience across different parties that they engage with, and there's reduced discrimination in the marketplace. You need that quality of data to really have a comprehensive view of the consumer. I think one of the other aspects that sometimes go unnoticed to our customers and to our consumers is how much work we actually do with policymakers. And there's a number of policymakers in the room today, some from South Africa, where I come from, some in other regions that we've worked with. And that really needs to be an ongoing conversation. The discussion we had this morning was around how access to credit is actually only a small piece of driving true financial inclusion. And James made the point. And it's very valid and relevant to the space that we operate in. If we don't foster the relationships with, we very often seem to be factions, competing for space in the marketplace, for share of consumer, for share of market. But as an ecosystem, we need to continue to have the conversations to make sure that we have the right policy that drives the right behavior. And the credit bureaus play a really pivotal role in that we've got direct access to the consumer. If you look at the pulse surveys and some of the studies that we do in the market, not just across Africa, but globally, the benchmarking that we're able to do, we're really able to demonstrate to all of the parties in the market, like where they sit and how they rank, and from a benchmarking perspective, where the pockets sit that we need to explore better. Another element, I think, is consumer education. That's something that really is an ongoing narrative. There is this fear of having, credit report of, while in South Africa, Alta might remember this, we had this big drive where we encouraged consumers to know your score. And if you look at markets like the US, where FICO is a very prominent and almost universal score, if you say to someone, what is your FICO score, every consumer in the market knows exactly what their score is. Where in the markets that we operate in, we find that different bureaus have different scores, people have different ways of ranking people, and consumers still have this fear of actually accessing their credit report and understanding where the areas are that they can focus on to actually enable them to access more credits and to have access to better products and services. You made the point also about whether some of this has been, some of the practices have been a detractor, and I definitely think that there has been some practices that we can learn from as we evolve in the marketplace. In many markets, we still have a very static credit reporting. A credit profile is regarded to almost be a certain recipe with certain fixed fields of information that gives you a very limited view of the consumer.
Whether it is the work being done through IPRS, and that adds a lot of stimulation and impact to the whole credit information sharing system. I think lastly, what I would want to mention is availability of diverse data sets. I know when you look at it, there's the traditional credit data that is available. It makes the process robust because you are able to make decisions on the population, but also now having alternative data or any other relevant data that helps us scale the impact makes a lot of difference. I feel those are part of it. But lastly, I think the system must also be open to external enablement. So if you talk about research, what is the purpose of research? What will the external bodies like our friends from IFC, Jared here from CIS, FSB, the ecosystem must be open to benefit and incorporate the learnings that are outside the system so that the system can be able to innovate and move forward.
When Jared and I and a couple of others were beginning to think about how we could get this up and running. Somebody in his wisdom said it would take 8 years of continuous data flow to get a threat bureau that could accurately predict the probability of default. So I'm wondering when that 8 years starts. When we fixed all of these things, how do we in the medium term think of us being able to get what's your suggestion?
My view is the preconditions are many, and I think you need to slice and dice them. They are what we will call low-hanging fruits, things that you can do. And you know, some of the critical things that look simple, but they are extremely.
We have so many markets, and each market has different context, and we have different levels of maturity. So I'll just speak to what I have seen. I think one of the biggest issues around this is access to national ID databases. We've noticed that as a big challenge within our markets. You can only do so much if you don't have a unique identifier for each of the customers that are providing the data within the system. Uganda recently issued a notice to say that we won't be using financial cards anymore and we'll be using our national IDs. That is actually a move forward, but then you think about how many people then are excluded because they don't have national IDs for whatever reason. We've also noticed, and this could just be a local situation and wouldn't be representative of Africa per se, but we've noticed that there's reluctance from the national ID authorities to share national ID data, and they keep referring to it as a data privacy issue, and the laws and policy around that. And we've seen even banks that are already a formal struggle to get information or to validate national ID data. So you can imagine how difficult it would be for these less formal institutions to have that. FSD Uganda is working with one of the CRBs, one of the newer CRBs in the market, and I think one of the things they've had headway with is being able to link directly to the national ID database. But this CRB is actually working with very low-tier institutions. These are VSLAs and SACCOs, and because most of these don't even have IT systems in place, so they are trying to put this in place while they're also doing this. Also, it's a whole, there's a lot that needs to be done, I think, in terms of that, in terms of access to national ID. Another thing I think that was discussed even this morning is regulator collaboration. If we are pulling data from different sources, all this data, most of these entities that are providing data are being regulated by different authorities within the markets, and we see that even just the consumer protection laws within the different regulators are different. Sometimes we see conflicting guidelines from one regulator to the next. Sometimes we also see gaps in regulation, especially around consumer protection and dispute resolution. So until we have some sort of, and I don't know, maybe we'll have along the way we'll hear some experiences from different markets on how they are doing this, on how they are bringing all regulators on board so that you're speaking the same language. I think that would still be an issue to discuss. Consumer empowerment, I think everyone has talked about that. I don't need to add anything more to that. But also for us, technical capacity for the institutions to put in place safe. I think Luz's presentation this morning just talked about data security and transparency and information. Just preparing the institutions that are ready to share the data to have all that in place is also something that that we have to seriously take into consideration.
Great.
So with the hint that we've been given on the definition of alternative data, so my interest will be, how can we ensure that this alternative data that we are going to use for scoring customers, that it is accurate, that the information it gives us we can rely on, because it's going to come from so many sources that have no regulation. So the reliability is quite doubtful. So what controls can we put?
I think if I can,
Studied by Luz, there was indication that social media can be used as a potential data source for alternative data. So I just wanted to find out from maybe Janine to what extent is social media information being used as alternative data, if at all, and what sort of information is being used, and how is that validated considering the level of misrepresentation of information that can be on social media? Thank you.
So just to give you a little bit of context, for instance, if you look at the MNOs, and again this is coming from the experience that we've noted in Tanzania, you'll find, let's say, MNO data, you might have 200 variables, but only 10 or 15 variables will end up in a scorecard. So it doesn't necessarily mean that when you have alternative data, straight out, you can just take that particular data set and then start deriving the scores for each potential or there is a statistical validation process behind it prior to the scorecard in place. And in many cases, there are also performance monitoring mechanisms. Many lenders will try to run parallel. They are currently a process in terms of underwriting together with a new model to see the viability, since the observation period of up to 12 months perhaps, before they can really say they are comfortable in terms of deploying that model on a larger scale. So there's always that kind of validation process and procedure, and it's part of the game, we'll say. But again, I mean, the narrative around alternative data is to drive financial inclusion using or access to finance using your reputational collateral. I think you said quite well in terms of how do you derive the propensity to pay in absence of traditional data. I think that's a key issue. Yes.
So let's wrap it up, because I know Ronald wants to make his presentation. I think if there are questions that they can be put to the panelists through the organizing committee, I know Job is waiting to take all the questions and give them to the panelists. But I'm sure as time goes on through the conference, you'll get more fulfilled in the answers that you get. Thank you very much for listening to us. Thank you to the panelists for braving the conditions. And I think we finished within time.